Okay, now we go to the Tipitaka. The Tipitaka is the collection of the teachings of Buddhism in the Pali language. And these form the doctrinal foundation of Theravada Buddhism. So the Tipitaka and the commentaries, the post-canonical Pali text, make up the complete body of classical Theravada texts. That means we have the suttas, the Vinaya, the Abhidhamma, which is part of the Tipitaka, and then the commentaries, which were analyzed and how they explain the points of the Dhamma, Vinaya, and Abhidhamma. So these teachings were first compiled about 3 months after the Buddha's passing away during the first Buddhist Council. So as I mentioned, they were originally memorized and handed down orally before being written down at the Aluvihara in Sri Lanka around 83 BC. These were not written on paper because I think number one, they didn't have paper then, and then number two, paper I think is not as durable as these things called ola leaves. So ola leaves were used to record these teachings. These are long, narrow leaves which were sewn at the edges and then grouped into bunches and stored into baskets. So if you can see, the meaning Tipitaka literally means 3 baskets because it was divided into 3 categories. The 3 categories are the Dhamma, Vinaya, and the Abhidhamma. So this is the place, Aluvihara, where the teachings were first put into writing. Again, I was here, so interesting place. These are the ola leaves. The process is they dry them, then they cut them into these strips. Then they inscribe them with a hard object, probably a metal object. But they inscribe them without any ink. That means it's really quite skillful because they inscribe them but they can't see what they're inscribing. Maybe very faintly. Then they rub it over with soot, a combination of soot and some other compounds. Then the writing appears. Then after that, they rub it away and you can see the text appear. This is a collection of the suttas. Okay, so the Pali canon is huge. It is a vast body of literature. The English translation adds up to thousands of pages. I think almost all of it, but there are still some parts of the canon which have not been translated. So most have already been published in English over the years. The size of the Pitaka is that it is 11 times the size of the Christian Bible. You know the Encyclopedia Britannica, right? It is 2.5 times the size of the Encyclopedia. So you can imagine how extensive it is. This is a collection of the Tipitaka. So the Tipitaka is comprised of the Vinaya Pitaka, which are the rules of conduct governing the daily affairs within the Sangha for both monks and nuns. The Sutta Pitaka is the discourses taught by the Buddha and which also contains teachings by some of his closest disciples. So the Abhidhamma Pitaka is reorganized and is actually an investigation into mind and matter. So some people, they say that the whole of the Abhidhamma is actually nothing more than to prove anatta, non-self. Okay, so the Vinaya is made up of 5 books, mostly concerned with the rules of the Sangha. And these rules are preceded by stories and explanations telling how the Buddha came to lay them down. The Buddha did not come up with these rules offhand. It's only when certain things happen that the Buddha imposed rules. So these rules were actually more or less ad hoc, which were drawn up as and when the occasion necessitated. So there's books on the major offences, minor offences, greater section, lesser section, and the summary of the Vinaya Pitaka. So I think most of us are familiar with the Sutta Pitaka. Consists of 5 collections or nikayas that contains discourses attributed to the Buddha. Some discourses were delivered by his disciples such as Sariputta, Ananda, Moggallana, and also some monks and nuns in some of the books. Most of the teachings actually were intended for the Sangha, but there were many discourses which deal with progress of the laity. There's a lot of people, when they read the Sutta Pitaka, they do not recognize this point, that the Buddha gave most of his teachings for the monks, not for the lay people. To the lay people, he gave simple teachings, dana, sila, saga. Dana, sila, saga means charity, morality, and a heavenly rebirth. In other words, he did not teach meditation. He did not teach the Four Noble Truth, Eightfold Path to most of the lay people. It's only when he recognized that they are of a certain capacity to be able to understand these teachings, then he taught them dana, sila, bhavana, sila, samadhi, panya, Four Noble Truth, Eightfold Path, even meditation. For example, his greatest lay disciple, Anatta Pitaka, on his deathbed, they started to give a teaching on meditation to Anatta Pitaka to calm his mind. Anatta Pitaka said, why didn't you give these teachings before? He said, oh, because you are lay people, that's why we don't give you these teachings. So Anatta Pitaka told the monks, please give also these teachings about meditation to the lay people so they can benefit from them. So therefore, people think that all these suttas is actually for the lay, it's not, it's more for the monks. But because of now our situation, we can understand better. It's also due to our development and progress that we can understand most of the Pitakas or most of the suttas which we are being taught right now. But some of the suttas taught to the lay people are extremely useful. I will go through them in the next couple of lessons, things like the Sigalovada Sutta, Mangala Sutta. In my book, The Life of Blessings book, please look through if you have the chance. So in any case, the Buddha adapted the manner and style of his discourses so that he used simpler concepts for the ordinary folk and more complex ideas for the educated and intellectual audiences. That means he gave his teachings to suit his listeners. So the Sutta Pitaka divided into the Digha Nikaya, the long discourses, Majjhima Nikaya, collection of the middle length sayings, Samyutta Nikaya, Anguttara Nikaya, and the Khuddaka Nikaya. And within the Khuddaka Nikaya, subdivided into many other books such as the Dhammapada, Jataka stories, so on and so forth. Finally, the Abhidhamma Pitaka. This comprises 7 works based on the Buddha's discourses, presented in terms of ultimate and conventional reality, defining states of mind and matter, systematically arranged and tabulated. That's why for those who study Abhidhamma, the language they use, the presentation is totally different from the suttas. In the suttas, the Buddha told many stories, used many similes to explain his points. In the Abhidhamma Pitakas, none or hardly any of this. It's just point by point, arranged, tabulated, systematically. So it's really quite dry to read. Like you just read like that, unless you go for a course or somebody explains to you, it's practically impossible to understand most of the teachings. Coming back to the point that the Abhidhamma is not strictly from the Buddha's mouth, the reason is that the Pali version of the Abhidhamma is a strictly Theravada collection. In other words, before there was Theravada, there were many other schools. Many of these other schools, from the Varivadans, had their own Abhidhamma, which was different, in many cases, from the Theravada Abhidhamma. So therefore, the Theravada Abhidhamma is usually not recognized by other schools and certainly not recognized by the Mahayana school. So the Mahayana, they also have their own version of the Abhidhamma. So this is something to be kept in mind when you study Abhidhamma. Like I said, you study it, but it should not take precedence over the suttas. It should be secondary to help you in your understanding of the suttas, but not to take precedence over the suttas. So the Abhidhamma Pitaka is divided into several books, 7 to be exact. So these are really quite detailed. I think even though you study Abhidhamma, you won't study all the books. The most is you study the summary of all these books. And this is the Kathavatu which I mentioned just now, compiled by Moggaliputta Tissa during the Third Council, clarifying points of controversy and rebutting heretical teachings. So that's the Tipitaka in a nutshell. So hope you all can understand a bit more about this aspect of the Dhamma, the teachings.